much stuff floating around. I don't know. People trying to say they wasn't together.
Basically was trying to get into a threesome. What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to another exciting episode of Kay and Manny. I'm the one they call Manny. She's a lady of all K's. And today's episode is sponsored by...
Lady K Enterprises, which we are a financial service firm, which we can help you register your business, to helping you expanding your team, all the way to helping you get in different investment portfolios for your business. Thank you, Manny, for that warm introduction. I just would like to welcome everyone to today's show. Put some respect on my name.
Yes, we're going to talk about respect, and we're going to talk about the boundaries of respect goes in, because before we even sat down and started, this whole show, you had a little small incident that happened right before we said, let's go. What can you want to share that with us?
No, I don't. But I'm also going to say, as far as put some respect on my name, I'm going to speak about the old school versus new school versus like pretty much saying that parents and grandparents, versus the new generation, how they used to do things, how we do things, and how they put certain labels and expectations on us because of what they thought patterns are. And we understand that, it has to be a balance, because when someone freshly comes new into this world, you as the parent or the grandparent has been exposed to a lot of different things. So of course, when this new creature comes into this world, you have so many concerns. And then as they grow older, you want to protect them. Then they get their own mind and they get their own thoughts. Right. And then when that comes into place, we got to know what's the difference between respect and disrespect, because now we have our own confidence of what we want things to look like. So, Manny, I know you want to lay some things out between disrespect and respect, once we come into our full mindset of how we feel and what our point of views are.
Right. And one thing you and I talked about off the show was, let's be honest. I was raised in the South. I was raised by two Black parents that were also raised in the South. So I think my definitions of respect is definitely something where it's like, respect your elders, respect what has been said to you, respect what you're being told, don't talk back, don't, give extra, as they say, give extra lip to anybody. You know what I mean? So it's like, we all have our different definitions, but especially here in the South, where respect is pretty much your stamp on who you are as a person and your character, it's always something where it's like you have to respect your elders, because a lot of times we tend to have a mind of our own of what's right and what is wrong. And then in some cases, yes, we are right. And then there are some cases that we are wrong. However, it's more of a respect thing, is whereas, okay, I respect your opinion, even though you're wrong, but I respect your opinion. And there's ways about doing that. And then we're going to definitely talk about that later on the show, where it's like, there are certain things that we may think that is right, and it has an updated version of it versus what it used to be. Because a lot of times, let's be honest, our parents were raised with a mentality of survival. And they have to survive in order to make it through the day or make it to wherever. Because everybody here knows that the South had ran by a different set of rules back in the 50s and 60s, even beforehand, and we had to really watch ourselves. And to this day, we still have to watch ourselves in certain sundown towns. So it's just like one of those moments where you're going to have to look at, got to look at the lay of the land on top of what's around your surroundings, on top of who's been around those surroundings as well.
Right. So I want to piggyback off with something that you said, because I have experienced a little bit of that, because my grandmother, she's from the South, and she raised me But even though she was from the South, I was raised in the North, and everybody know I can't get rid of that East Coast language that everybody
East
always
Coast
points out.
bias.
So
Just saying, go ahead.
grandma had a certain way of viewing things, versus we live in the city, and how we do things is completely different. But I want to go and touch base back on respecting your elders just real quick. Now, giving that respect is like when they say something or when they're trying to teach you something, you just taking the moment to hear what they're saying. And then I'm apply some context on don't talk back, because that's really applicable to a child. But at the same time, bro, even with the child, there are boundaries, and we're gonna go about that a little bit later on how to speak to an adult, because you want to go ahead and voice what you want to say, but you're doing it respectfully. So as far as like, you're an adult and you're taking advice of an elder, you can say, well, grandma, I understand your perspective, but I just want to let you know, this is how I see things, and, X, Y, and Z. Now, sometimes, they'll be receptive to it. Other times, it's going to take some time to understand, because they've been having this confined thinking for a long time.
Right.
And it was actually a movie I'm pretty sure a lot of people can relate to. I'm sure we all said it before. Me and Manny was talking about this Christmas, right? There was a scene in the movie that it was Loretta Devine, and because her husband left, because he wanted to pursue his music career, the youngest child had that same itch. The child had a beautiful voice. He wanted to sing, but because he know how his mother felt, he kept it a secret, even though some of his siblings knew, once they went to a show and they watched him perform. So in this particular scene, she's saying, what Senior did to me? And he said, well, Mom, I'm not my dad. And he was trying to proceed and say something. And she was like, don't be disrespectful. Like, don't be talking back to me. And it's like, that's a moment right there that I do not think it was a disrespectful moment, because she is putting something on a child because it's something she experienced.
Correct.
And as the child tried to open up and speak to her, she get a different feel. So there are a lot of parents out there that just feels because you're voicing your opinion, you're speaking up, they feel like you're being disrespectful. But in that case, the tone and how you speak to somebody matters. And in that particular scene, his tone wasn't crazy. It wasn't outrageous. He still wanted to respect and honor his mom, but he still wanted to pursue what he wants to do. So this is going to go into, your relationships with your elders, with your friends, with your family, because now you have your own sound mind, and because you're looking to pursue the things that you want to, they look at you completely different. So Manny, let's talk about that aspect right there.
Yeah. Respecting your elders. Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am. Yes, sir. No, sir. Right away. I understand. Stuff like that. Right. Again, coming from the South, you respect. We've all been taught respect your elders. Don't talk back. Do what they ask you to do, even though they may not ask for much. Just but there's a difference between saying yes to everything and saying yes to the important things, because a lot of times we will get in our own mind where it's like we have to say yes to what grandma says. Now, don't get me wrong. Do they provide a lot of sound advice? Absolutely. Do they provide a lot of wisdom to you? Absolutely. But then there's just certain things that they do that you may not either A, feel comfortable with, or B, think there's a better way of doing it or an easier way. Because let's be honest, the way they taught it was the law, according to some households. But again, somewhere between A and B, times have definitely changed, and times have definitely made things easier. Not saying that it's right, but it definitely made things easier. But I've always looked at it as when you respect your elders, yeah, you listen to what they say. Now, if you disagree, then you respectfully disagree. Not, oh, that's bullshit. You definitely don't say that to your elders unless you want your teeth and your jaw on the floor. But it's just one of those moments where it's just like, you got to understand when to say yes and when to say no, and understand what boundaries are, which we'll get to later in the show. But you also have to look at, you can't say certain things to your elders as well as certain things to your friends. Obviously, my language is going to change when I'm dealing with my friends or my peers versus my parents, my grandmother, or my elders. Because a lot of times it's still a hierarchy thing when it comes to your parents and your grandmother, or your grandparents and your parents and your elders are up here. And you may be still right here as far as the respect chain, but you always have to revere them in a way of, you have to be respectful to them. But a lot of times what we get messed up with is when they talk to us any type of way, and we're well into our 30s and 40s and 50s, but they still look at us as kids. And that's something I disagree with, because a lot of times, it's just like, you're not supposed to know that. I'm like, wait a minute. Hold on. First of all, I'm 30 plus years old. And second of all, we're not at that age where we don't know, like, we don't need to keep family secrets. Now, if there's something that's going on that we can maybe chime in and maybe do something different to it, then yes, let's go ahead and do it. But let's be real. I'm not a kid. I'm no longer a kid. My mindset is no longer of a kid. So understand that as I grew up, listening to your advice and listening to your wisdom, I can bestow some wisdom back to them. And I think sometimes some family members, not saying mine, but some family members get that mistaken because they still look at us as kids, as, a certain inches tall and still running around, with toys and what have you. I mean, there's got to be a time where you have to say, okay, my child has grown up. Let's listen to what they got to say.
Now, I'm gonna chime in on this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you said some things that really hit home, Manny. And as for me, just as a parent, even though my kids are young, my kids still teach me. So me personally, I think what happened is sometimes, and I'm speaking of the older generation, sometimes in their mind, because they feel like I have the wisdom, I have the knowledge, you need to hear me. Versus when your children or the young ones, your grandchildren, when they speak to you, especially when it comes to grandparents and grandchildren, their relationship is a little bit more. I feel like the grandparents hear the children a little bit more differently. But when it's a child, you're like, when it's your own personal child, sometimes some parents, they act like they can't learn from their children. So I have to chime in and say this, parents, no matter what age your children are, you should be listening to them. Because let me tell you something right now. If you do not listen to your children now, that they're at a young age, a young vulnerable age, and you want them to have an open communication with you, you want that relationship with them, how do you expect them to open up and tell you the big things when you didn't even hear them when they were saying the little things to you? Mm-hmm. You did not acknowledge them because you feel like, oh, they're small. But guess what? Even though they're small, they're still human beings. And they learn and they see things differently. And you definitely have to take the opportunity to say, oh, wow. Even for me, my son is 6 years old. I learn from him every day because I have to learn that they live in a new day and time. And I can't force my ways on my son, but I can still teach him the key things that matter. And that's what we really should be focused on. We should be focused on what we want to pass down to our legacy, what we want to pass down to generations. And it's not always about money, because sometimes we want money. Listen, I know we have a lot of talks about breaking generational wealth. But before you can break that wealth financially, the wealth starts here mentally. So if you want to pass that on about them, being abundance in a lot of things, you got to think, well, what am I laying here? What am I saying? And most importantly, what am I displaying? Because a lot of our parents, especially old school, they in that attention mode. Do as I say and not as I do. That don't work.
I hate that. I hate that.
I cannot stand it, because what you're telling me is, and what you're telling the other generation is, listen, I can do what I want to do because I'm old and ain't nothing gonna change. But then you want me to change? That don't make no sense. Yes, you should want to change for the better, but please don't come at me and tell me that you think I should step up my game, but you don't step up your game because you feel like you're too old. You're never too old to learn, and you're never too old to transition. Fix your relationship with your children first before you want to go ahead and tell your children how to treat their children. And that's a lot of parents. And before you say something, Manny, I just got to say this. A lot of African-American parents feel as if when they give you an advice, or when they tell you something and you choose not to take it, they look at that as a sign of disrespect.
Right.
Not.
Right. And that's something that we definitely expound upon as well, because sometimes we may not, again, what worked in the 1950s, 1960s, may be somewhat irrelevant and somewhat outdated in 2022. Because a lot of times, again, different mindset back then, where it's a survival, whereas 2022 is still about survival, but in another sense. But I wanted to say something to you, because you said something that's interesting, because you said that, the whole do as I say is not as I do. I said, and I said to you, I hate that, but there's a caveat to this, and this is where I have to jump in. There are going to be some people out there who are like, okay, I'll give you a clear-cut example. In my mother's hometown, which is in Louisiana, we have what is called winos, basically guys who drink, basically sit in the corner and just drink all day long with nothing else to do. But they will simply tell you as a kid, don't become an alcoholic. You know what I mean? Now, granted, they may have a different story of why they do that. Because again, another clear-cut story. I was a young kid, and I'm not going to mention his name, but I was a young kid. There was this guy in our this guy in our in my grandmother's neighborhood in Shreveport, and he told me and my brother, don't ever have another man's blood on their hands. Meaning, something happened. I'm not going to say what. And to this day, as a 60, 70-year-old, it still haunts them. So that's something, whereas as a child, you took that advice and you remember those words. Because a lot of times they may do something, or they may still be doing something, but they don't want you to get caught up on what they get caught up in. Because a lot of times they can't get out of a situation, or they can't get out of what they got themselves into. Like, for instance, if they're hooked on drugs, they go tell you, don't do this. Like, this is bad. This is why it's bad. And a lot of times we may look at that as hypocritical, but then but if you really kind of think about why they're saying these things and why they're in such a disarray because of what they're in, okay, now I get it. And that's something I wanted to piggyback and clarify when you say do as I say, not as I do. Because a lot of times we get that saying like, well, how you can tell me not to do drugs when you're a drug addict?
Right.
Okay, that you're absolutely right. You shouldn't be telling somebody not to do drugs when you're a drug addict. However, if you really think about it, you don't want to go. They're trying to tell you in so many less words. You don't want to go through what I'm going through. You don't want to. You don't want to wake up in the middle of the night grabbing something and try to sell it off to get a hit. You don't want to go out in the middle of the night clucking and what have you, as we say here in the South. In other words, you just hyping for a hit. You don't want to go out there and just start, doing whatever just to get a hit because that drug is more powerful than your willpower. But we're going to get off of that because this is going to turn into another type of episode. I want to talk about boundaries. Okay? I want to talk about boundaries because a lot of times we get that misconstrued. And that's something that I feel like a lot of African-American families need to start realizing that when it comes to the newer generation, not saying the older, but the newer generation, such as millennials and up, there are certain things we have to say, we cannot stand for this. Like, we will not go for this. Now, I ran into this meme on Instagram. It was by Dr. Rita Walker, but it was a repost. And it's basically saying what is boundaries. And this is basically an acronym, and we will post this. Be aware of what is unacceptable and normalizing saying no. Do what is best for you, and now that is not your responsibility to sacrifice yourself for others. So a lot of times we get so drawn up on doing what's best for everybody else and not worrying about how you feel about a certain situation. It's just like, you know what? I don't feel comfortable with this, or I don't feel comfortable with this happening, or I don't feel comfortable about people talking to me about this, or talking around me about this. So it's just like one of those things where you just kind of have to say, I'm not going to be a part of this. And that's something that develops over time. Not saying this happened overnight, because a lot of times people say, well, why these boundaries all of a sudden came up? No, this is where you have to talk to said person about, hey, this is what I tolerate, this is what I won't tolerate because of my own mental health well-being. Because a lot of times when you do this, and this, I cringe or I get anxiety, things like that. And I think sometimes we tend to utilize that message. We don't choose to display that message on why certain things, why we don't tolerate certain things. I think that's also important because we tend to say, I don't like it when you talk loud. Instead of instead of just throwing your hands up and just running out the room, have that conversation with that person saying, hey, listen, I don't like it when y'all do this because of this. You know what I'm saying? Like, I ran into a friend of mine. She doesn't like loud noises, let alone like fireworks, because that brought up a drama of what she went through as a child. So she told her mom, or told her family, saying, hey, listen, y'all have fun at the fireworks. I don't like them because when I hear fireworks pop, I remember it brings me back to this place. That's all there really is to it. And I know you got something to say about it. So bring it on.
Right. So as far as boundaries, you kind of hit it on the head, Manny, like being vocal with your family about your dislike. But one of the biggest things that I noticed in the African American community is our language and how we speak to one another. And sometimes we feel like, because I don't know why we feel like we should owe the name, the word nigga, So sometimes when we greet ourselves with, hey, and what's up? And then in other formalities, that's even more brutal, right? I'm not gonna list those curse words, but I know where I'm going with that. So there's a lot of our family who speaks like that. And you can come out of age and say, hey, I do not like it when you call me a B. And I have to say this, I'm gonna speak to the moms. You might think, oh, it's just an expression and I don't mean nothing by it, but because I'm used to it. I do not think it's healthy for a mother to call her daughter a B. I do not think it's healthy for a mother to call her son an N. I do not. Those are some derogatory terms. And when you come to that place that you no longer want to accept that, and your family member keep doing that after you said, hey, don't call me that. This is why in our community, we say, well, how come so-and-so don't come around? They don't come around because you keep implementing the same behavior, but you want them to come around into an environment they no longer want to be in, that they're trying to grow. But then you say, oh, how you want that, but then you still smoke? Why are you nitpicking their growth? And that's another thing too. When somebody wants to focus on a certain area in their life, and you keep bringing up, well, you do this, so what? Why don't you say to yourself, well, what am I doing to transition or to prepare myself to stop behaving the way I behave? Boundaries.
It's all about boundaries, because a lot of times we know of the terminology, or you just learn the terminology, but then again, how do you utilize it? And like I said before, it's nothing that happens. Something that happens over time. It's not going to be overnight. It is not going to be instant. So you have to learn, what are your triggers, what brings you anxiety, which is another show, but you just have to understand, and you have to let everybody know around you, saying, I don't like this. Like, I'll take myself as an example. I don't particularly like big crowds, meaning I don't like going somewhere and I have to be the center of attention. Now, all people know that I'm pretty much an introvert. Like, I don't mind going out, but I'm not going to go out in the club, because one, I'm almost 40, and two, I'm not going to just go somewhere and I see a whole bunch of young people doing whatever. And it just brings me back to a place where I said to myself, I don't want to do that anymore. You know what I mean? So a lot of times, so my friends respect the fact that if they go somewhere, and if this is going to be like that type of setting, they know not to invite me. But I also know that if they do invite me in some areas, I know what I can tolerate and what I don't tolerate, and what I'm comfortable with and what I'm not comfortable with. So if I'm just sitting back, just watching everybody, it's not that I'm being disrespectful. I'm not having fun. It's just that's not my type of scene, because I like to lay back, chill, maybe listen to some music, have a cigar, maybe have something to drink, and that's cool with me, because I'm not so big on the big ambiance of a whole bunch of people around, especially with this pandemic happening. So it's just one of those things, again, knowing what you're comfortable with. And that's where a lot of times we have to express what we're comfortable with and what we're not comfortable with. Those what boundaries are. And that's what respect is. That's all there is to.
Right. As far as also respect and boundaries, I have to lay this too.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of laid it out. You said, well, you know me, and you know these are the things that I do not like. So because you know that person is not into those type of things, if you have another friend or family member that is, and you two want to go that route, that's fine. But here's what I don't like. I don't like when you call people names because they don't want to do certain things. Like, and again, I have to tackle this because we do this a lot in our community. We're like, oh, he's such a square. Why do you have to do that? And you don't realize it, but what you're doing is you're trying to do things to make you feel better about yourself, and you're belittling that person because you put a label on them. Why can't you just respect the fact Dustin doesn't like this, and I'm gonna let him be that, but I know Sue like this, so I'm gonna go rock with Sue. And that's how simple it can be. But sometimes you don't even realize we are unconsciously saying and doing these things. And then sometimes I have to say this too, as an adult, when you speak to your parents and you speak to your grandparents and you say, hey, this is what I don't want my kids, this is what I do like for my kids, and then you go behind the parents' back and do the opposite, that causes friction right there, because what you're telling your child is that I don't care what you say, I don't respect what you say, I'm gonna do what I want to do. That's not cool. And there are a lot of grandparents doing that. Here's a primary example, because I witnessed it and I said, that's not cool. This child, he got a lot of hair. The hair is crazy. And because of the two different races, they don't know how to tame their hair. So a grandmother said, hey, I'm going to cut it. And I said, I will not do that if I was you, because both parents said they don't want their child their hair cut. If they was going to cut the hair, they should be the ones to do it, not you. But the grandparent was so fixed on what, I'm going to do it. And I said, I don't think you should. So when the parent came around and she was like, hey, I can't take his hair, I'm going to cut it. And he looked at her and said, all right, so you really want to cause friction for me, don't you? And she was like, what you mean? He said, didn't I tell you his mother don't want his hair cut? She was like, but look at his hair. I understand that. Now, if you had to put some braids in it or do some other means to tame it, I get it.
That's different.
But for you to tell me, the parent, I'm going to cut it, you think, you're putting that person in a position, and grandparents don't realize that you're putting that person in hot waters. I think with all due respect, you have to learn how to stay in your lane. So parents and grandparents, we are coming from a place with respect. We're just saying that we want to be heard. And guess what? As we go on in this thing of life, we're going to make mistakes. We're going to make some cuts and bruises. It is not always your responsibility to criticize us each way, especially in front of our children. That is not cool, and you don't realize you do it unconsciously. You speak badly about the parent to the grandchildren. That's not cool. Where is the respect? Because you feel like you're always right because you're older and you wisdom. Like Manny said, this is not the 1960s. We live in a completely different world. But I do also understand too, people want to pick and choose what they adapt to. They're allowed to, but stay in your place. And that's what I gotta say for today. But I thank everyone for tuning in. Those are my closing remarks. Manny, what are your closing remarks?
Respect goes both ways. And a lot of people need to understand that respect does go both ways. But I will want to ask the audience, drop a comment on what is your definition of respect, or give us some examples of boundaries. Because a lot of times we don't know what boundaries are, but at the same time, some people may give us different boundaries and be like, oh, I never thought of that. So let's help each other out in this case.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. Thank you, Manny. And everyone, continue to follow us here at the Lady Kay Chapter podcast. We are here on YouTube, Instagram, Spotify, Apple. We are also on Twitter and TikTok. And we appreciate you tuning in with us today again at 11 a.m. Check us next week. Continue to like, comment, and share. And we will see you next time.
Take care, everyone.
Lady Kay.